Rachel, a hotel receptionist, makes a snap judgment about the James family, a decision that puts her career and her self-worth on the line. But when the hotel owner gives her a chance to make amends, she's thrown into the unexpected world of a struggling community youth center. It's here that Rachel comes face to face with the people she once dismissed and must confront her own biases. Will she earn back the trust of those she hurt, or will her past mistakes hold her back? And what will happen when the community and even the James family push her to prove that she's truly changed? If you're curious to find out how Rachel's journey unfolds, like, subscribe, and comment below. Tell us your thoughts on the power of second chances, and stay tuned for more stories that inspire. The Lincoln Plaza Hotel was a sight to behold, a towering symbol of opulence in the heart of the city. Its entrance, flanked by marble columns and gleaming brass doors, beckoned to those who could afford its luxury. For Ethan James, his wife Natalie, and their two children, Carter and Lily, this place represented a new experience, a step into a world of luxury they hadn't often explored. Ethan, dressed in a sleek gray suit, held the door open for his family. Natalie, graceful in a green dress that shimmered under the lobby lights, guided Lily inside. The little girl's eyes were wide with awe as she took in the crystal chandeliers and the grand piano that played softly in the background. Carter, wearing a simple navy blazer, stood a bit awkwardly beside his father, trying to keep up an air of confidence despite the grandeur around him. "Wow, Dad, this place is huge!" Lily's voice was a delighted whisper as she spun around, taking in the marble floors that seemed to stretch endlessly. Ethan smiled down at his daughter, but a knot of unease twisted in his stomach. He had seen this sort of place before. Beautiful, extravagant, but not always welcoming. He knew the kind of assumptions that sometimes lurked behind polite smiles. They had been invited to an exclusive charity gala, where Ethan was set to give a keynote speech highlighting the community work he had poured his heart into. For years, Ethan had been a successful entrepreneur, but he had also made a name for himself through his efforts to support youth programs and educational initiatives. This event was meant to celebrate those contributions. As they walked further into the lobby, the grandeur of the hotel seemed to close in around them, and Ethan noticed the subtle changes in the atmosphere. Conversations quieted as they passed, and the warmth in the air seemed to turn chilly. A couple at the coffee bar, dressed in sleek black outfits, glanced at the family before looking away, as though dismissing them as unimportant. Another guest, a man in an expensive suit, raised an eyebrow as he passed, his expression veiled yet unmistakably condescending. Ethan tightened his hold on Lily's hand. Natalie caught his eye and offered a small, reassuring smile, though her own unease was clear. They approached the reception desk where a young woman, Rachel Turner, stood with a smile that seemed professional at first glance. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her nails, painted bright crimson, tapped rhythmically against the marble counter as she waited for them to approach. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Lincoln Plaza," she said brightly. But when her gaze fell on Ethan and his family, her smile faltered for a split second. Her eyes took in their attire, nice but not the usual couture she was accustomed to seeing in the lobby. She regained her composure quickly, but the forced cheeriness in her tone was hard to miss. "How can I help you today?" Ethan handed her the printed confirmation of their reservation with a polite smile. "We have a reservation under Ethan James. We're here for the gala tonight." Rachel glanced down at the paper, then back at Ethan, her smile tightening. "Are you sure you have the right hotel? This is the Lincoln Plaza." Her tone had shifted, still polite, but with a note of skepticism that dug under Ethan's skin. Her eyes flicked toward Lily, whose excitement seemed to have dimmed under the receptionist's scrutinizing gaze. "Yes, I'm sure," Ethan replied evenly. "Our reservation should be under my name, Ethan James." Rachel nodded, turning to her computer screen. Her fingers moved lazily over the keyboard, and the minutes dragged on. The family stood at the desk, aware of the stares from other guests around them. Carter shifted uncomfortably, glancing back at the murmuring onlookers, while Natalie rubbed Lily's shoulders, trying to keep her distracted. "I'm not seeing anything here," Rachel said after a while, not bothering to look up. "Perhaps there's been a mix-up. I can recommend some other options nearby that might be more suitable. Her voice was coated with false sympathy, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. Ethan took a deep breath, willing himself to remain calm. He pulled out his phone and showed Rachel the confirmation email. Here's the confirmation, he said, keeping his tone measured. We've been invited specifically for this event. Rachel's expression tightened, but she nodded curtly and began typing again, as if making a reluctant effort. The moment stretched into a silence so thick that even the soft murmur of the piano couldn't ease the tension. Natalie caught Ethan's eye again, her brow furrowed with worry. Daddy, are we not staying here? Lily whispered, tugging on Ethan's hand. Her voice was small, and it broke his heart to hear the uncertainty in it. We are, sweetie, he whispered back, squeezing her hand gently. Just a little mix-up, that's all. Rachel finally looked up, her expression unreadable. I'll need to speak with the manager, she said, her voice clipped, just to confirm the details. Without waiting for a response, she disappeared through a door behind the counter, leaving the James family standing there in the middle of the opulent lobby. The silence that followed was heavy, the eyes of the other guests like a weight pressing down on them. Ethan tried to stay composed, but he could see the hurt in Natalie's eyes and the confusion on Carter's face. She didn't even try to hide it, Natalie murmured, shaking her head. It's like she thinks we don't deserve to be here. Ethan's jaw clenched as he put an arm around her shoulders. We're not going to let her ruin this, he said softly, though the frustration was clear in his voice. Let's just wait and see what happens. But the minutes ticked by, and each one seemed to draw more attention from the other guests, who cast curious glances their way, whispering behind their hands. It was supposed to be a special night for the James family for a moment to celebrate their contributions to the community. Instead, they were made to feel like outsiders in a place where they should have been honored. The door behind the counter finally opened, and Rachel emerged, followed by a tall, older man in an impeccably tailored suit. His hair was silver, his movements smooth with the kind of ease that comes with authority. Ethan recognized him immediately. Mr. Henry Daniels, the owner of the Lincoln Plaza, had personally invited him to the event. Mr. Daniels' face lit up the moment he saw Ethan. Ethan, he exclaimed, striding forward with surprising speed. His voice was filled with warmth that reverberated through the lobby. I'm so glad you could make it. I've been looking forward to this night for weeks. Rachel's face went pale as she watched Mr. Daniels reach out and clasp Ethan's hand in a firm shake, then pull him into a brief hug. The surprise on the faces of the onlookers around them was palpable, the judgmental whispers dying off in an instant. Natalie squeezed Ethan's arm, relief washing over her features, but the tension in the air lingered. Mr. Daniels turned toward Rachel, his expression hardening as he gestured toward her. Why were my special guests made to wait like this? He asked, his voice cool but carrying an edge that made Rachel shrink back slightly. Rachel stumbled over her words, her confident demeanor crumbling. I thought there was a mistake. I didn't realize. Mr. Daniels cut her off with a sharp look. You didn't realize because you didn't bother to check properly, did you? He glanced back at Ethan, his tone softening. I'm deeply sorry for this, Ethan. Let's get you checked in right away. This should never have happened. The lobby, once filled with silent judgment, now seemed to hold its breath as the power dynamic shifted. Rachel, so sure of herself moments before, now stood on shaky ground, while the James family finally saw a glimmer of the welcome they deserved. Mr. Daniels's presence seemed to shift the entire atmosphere of the lobby, as if the air itself held its breath. Rachel, usually unflappable, now stood trembling slightly behind the reception desk. She had never seen the owner so openly displeased, and the sharp disapproval in his eyes made her want to shrink into the marble floor. I thought there might be an error with the reservation, she stammered, trying to regain some composure. Her eyes darted nervously to Ethan and Natalie, who stood beside Mr. Daniels with a mix of relief and lingering frustration. Mr. Daniels turned to Ethan, an apologetic look in his eyes. I assure you, Ethan, this kind of treatment is not what we stand for here. I am so sorry that your family had to experience this. Ethan inclined his head, maintaining his polite demeanor despite the simmering anger beneath. I appreciate that, Henry, but my concern is not just about our reservation. It's about the way we were made to feel. My family has been looked at like we don't belong here since we stepped through those doors. Natalie squeezed Ethan's hand, her expression softening as she looked at Mr. Daniels. We've been treated like we're intruding. It's not just about the reservation being misplaced. Rachel's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and she took a small step forward, her voice quivering. I didn't mean for it to come across that way. I thought maybe there was a mix-up and Mr. Daniels' gaze shifted sharply to Rachel, cutting off her weak explanation. That's enough, Rachel, he said firmly. You should have checked their reservation thoroughly the first time. And more importantly, you should have treated them with the same respect you give any guest. For a moment, Rachel stood frozen, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the desk. She had prided herself on maintaining a professional front, but now, under Mr. Daniels's disapproving stare, her facade cracked. All she could think of was how quickly things had spiraled and how she had allowed her own assumptions to cloud her judgment. Mr. Daniels turned back to Ethan and his family. Let's get you all checked in properly, he said, his voice warmer as he addressed them directly. He gestured to another staff member, a young man with a name tag reading David, who rushed over to assist. David, please escort Mr. and Mrs. James and their children went to the presidential suite and ensure they have everything they need. David, looking slightly flustered but eager to please, nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Daniels, right this way, Mr. James. He offered a genuine smile to Ethan and Natalie, a welcome contrast to the earlier coldness they had faced. As they followed David toward the elevators, Rachel watched them go, a sinking feeling in her chest. She had never imagined that her actions would draw such attention from the owner himself, or that she would be left standing there, exposed in front of the entire lobby. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her, judging her now as harshly as she had judged the James family. Mr. Daniels lingered for a moment, his gaze still fixed on Rachel. We'll discuss this later, Rachel, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing behind the desk, her mind reeling. She knew she would have to face the consequences, but she couldn't shake the feeling of shame that burned through her. This job, this place, had always been her safe space, a symbol of the success she had built for herself. And now in a few thoughtless moments, she had jeopardized it all. Ethan tried to settle his nerves as David led them through a richly carpeted hallway, past gilded mirrors and ornate vases. Natalie walked beside him, holding Lily's hand, while Carter trailed a few steps behind, his expression clouded with a mix of anger and confusion. Dad, why did she treat us like that? Carter's voice broke the silence, sharp with a youthful sense of injustice. He was old enough to understand the tension that had filled the air, even if he couldn't fully grasp the deeper currents of prejudice beneath it. Ethan slowed his pace, glancing back at his son. Some people make judgments before they know who you really are, he said, keeping his voice low. They see someone and decide what they think without looking deeper. But that's their mistake, not ours. Natalie squeezed his arm gently, offering him a small, sad smile. You handled it well, Ethan. I'm proud of you. Ethan's mouth twitched into a brief smile, but the weight of the encounter still lingered. They had faced similar situations before, subtle, quiet prejudices that they had learned to brush off over the years. But this time they had felt different, sharper, with their children watching closely. David led them into the presidential suite, a sprawling room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Plush sofas and rich, dark wood furniture filled the space, and a welcome basket awaited them on a marble table. But as Ethan looked around, he couldn't quite shake the bitter taste in his mouth. We'll be all right here, David said, setting their luggage down. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to call the front desk. He hesitated, then added more quietly, I'm really sorry for what happened earlier, sir. It's not how things usually are here. Ethan looked at the young man and saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. He gave a short nod. Thank you, David. We appreciate it. As David left, Ethan let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. He walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. Natalie came up beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. Do you think she'll lose her job? Natalie asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan was silent for a moment, thinking of Rachel's panicked expression, her forced smile crumbling under the weight of her mistake. "I don't know," he said finally, "but maybe she'll think twice the next time she makes assumptions about someone." After the James family had left the lobby, Rachel remained behind the desk, her thoughts churning. The whispers from the guests who had witnessed the scene still buzzed faintly in the background, like a low hum she couldn't tune out. She could feel the curious, judging stares of her co-workers, especially Anna, another receptionist who had watched the entire exchange with raised eyebrows. Anna leaned in as she passed by, her voice low but tinged with satisfaction. "Tough luck, Rachel. Looks like you really messed up this time." Rachel shot her a sharp look, but the retort died in her throat. Deep down, she knew Anna was right. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced that she knew what kind of people belonged in a place like Lincoln Plaza. Now all she felt was the cold weight of reality pressing down on her. Mr. Daniels returned to the lobby shortly after, his expression still stern. He gestured for Rachel to follow him into a small meeting room just off the reception area. She hesitated, then followed, her hands twisting nervously. He closed the door behind them, folding his arms as he regarded her with a look of profound disappointment. "Rachel, I've seen a lot of things in my years running this hotel, but what I saw today, that's not what we stand for." Rachel swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't mean for it to get so out of hand. I thought maybe they were in the wrong place, and—" Mr. Daniels held up a hand, cutting her off. "It's not just about a mistake with a reservation. It's about the way you treated them, as if they didn't deserve the same respect as anyone else walking through those doors. That's not the kind of environment I want in my hotel." Rachel's throat tightened, and for a moment, she felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. She blinked them back, forcing herself to remain calm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll do better." Mr. Daniels studied her, his expression softening slightly. "I hope you do, because right now I'm giving you a choice. You can leave this job, or you can start to understand what it means to treat every guest with respect, no matter who they are." Rachel nodded quickly, relief washing over her. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mr. Daniels." I promise. Mr. Daniels sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "We'll see, Rachel. But it's not me you need to prove yourself to. It's them." As the evening approached, Ethan and Natalie tried to shake off the earlier tension. Lily played quietly in the corner, coloring in her new sketchbook, while Carter sat beside his father, browsing through his phone. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Carter said quietly, glancing up at him. "You didn't let her push us around." Ethan ruffled his son's hair, a small smile breaking through. "Thanks, buddy. Sometimes you just have to stand up for what's right." Carter nodded, then glanced toward the window, where the city lights were beginning to flicker on. "Do you think the gala's going to be better?" Ethan looked out at the skyline, the city glowing with promise. He hoped that tonight would bring a shift, a reminder of why they had come in the first place. "I think it will," he said, his voice firm. "I think it will be worth it." The hours between the lobby confrontation and the start of the gala moved slowly for Rachel. She remained behind the reception desk, her hands still slightly trembling as she tried to maintain the polished smile expected of her. But beneath her professional facade, her mind churned with anxiety. Mr. Daniels' parting words echoed in her head. "It's not me you need to prove yourself to. It's them." Rachel glanced over to the corner of the lobby, where she could still catch glimpses of Ethan and Natalie as they navigated the hotel's opulent halls. They walked with their heads held high, but Rachel could see the tension lingering in their faces, a tension she knew she had put there. Regret churned in her stomach, and for the first time in her career, she felt completely out of her depth. "Maybe I really have ruined everything," she thought, biting her lip as she tried to refocus on her duties. But even as she checked in other guests, her mind kept drifting back to Ethan's words about respect, words that had cut through her like a cold wind. Back in their suite, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the speech he had written for the evening. Normally, these kinds of events didn't faze him. He had given talks and presentations in rooms filled with influential people before, but tonight his confidence felt like a thin veneer, barely holding back the simmering frustration from the encounter with Rachel. Natalie entered the adjoining room, where she had been helping Lily change into her dress for the gala. She sat beside Ethan, smoothing down the fabric of her gown, a deep blue that shimmered under the soft lighting of their suite. "How's the speech looking?" she asked gently, her hand finding him on the bedspread. Ethan shrugged, setting his phone aside. "It's all right. I've been trying to keep it focused on the kids, the community, the impact we're making. But now, part of me wants to say something more." Natalie nodded, understanding the undercurrent of his words. "About what happened earlier?" Ethan glanced toward the door, where they could hear the muffled voices of Carter and Lily playing in the living area. He lowered his voice, keeping it just between him and his wife. "Yeah, I don't want to make tonight about that, but it feels wrong not to acknowledge it. It's like they need to understand that this kind of thing doesn't just go away because of one apology." Natalie rested her head on his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll know what to say when the time comes. You always do. And whatever happens, we'll be right there with you." Ethan kissed her forehead, drawing strength from her presence. For a moment, they sat together in silence, letting the weight of the day settle between them. But even as he held his wife close, Ethan knew that the evening's challenges were far from over. Downstairs, Rachel barely managed to keep up her professional front as the afternoon shift wound down. She moved mechanically, her mind replaying the confrontation in the lobby over and over again. Each time she wished she had handled it differently, wished she could go back and swallow her pride, ask a few more questions, try to understand instead of dismissing it so quickly. When her shift finally ended, she headed toward the staff room to gather her things, but Mr. Daniels intercepted her before she could reach the door. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his expression thoughtful but stern. "Rachel," he said, his tone more tired than angry now, "we need to talk." She swallowed hard, nodding as she followed him into a small meeting room just off the main hallway. The space was cozy with wood-paneled walls and dim lighting, but to Rachel, it felt stifling. She stood by the door, waiting for him to speak. Mr. Daniels gestured for her to sit, then took a seat across from her. "You've been with us for what, 4 years now?" Rachel nodded quickly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Yes, sir," he sighed, rubbing a hand across his forehead. "I know you've been a good employee, Rachel. You've handled a lot of tough situations. But today you let your assumptions get the better of you. And because of that, you made a serious mistake." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She looked down at her hands, wishing she could rewind the clock to that moment when the James family first walked up to the desk. I thought I was doing my job," she managed, her voice small. "I thought I was looking out for the hotel's reputation." Mr. Daniels shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face. "And that's exactly where you went wrong. You thought protecting our reputation meant turning people away based on how they look. But what you did today hurt our reputation more than any mistake in a booking system could." Rachel felt her cheeks burn with shame. "I know, I didn't realize how wrong I was until I saw your reaction, until I saw how it made them feel." Mr. Daniels studied her, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he said, "I'm not firing you, Rachel. But you're going to need to earn back the trust you've lost here, and that starts with understanding the people you dismissed so easily." She looked up at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Ethan James runs a youth program out in Eastwood. Kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, most of them. He's invited you to spend time volunteering there for a month. If you're serious about making amends, you'll take the offer." Rachel's stomach lurched. "Volunteering? I don't know anything about that." "You'll learn," Mr. Daniels said firmly, standing up. "And it'll do you good. If you want to keep your job here, I expect you to show up tomorrow morning at the youth center. Ethan's willing to give you a chance. Don't waste it." Rachel's mouth went dry, and she nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the ultimatum settle onto her shoulders. "I understand," she whispered, though a part of her wondered if she was truly prepared for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, in the presidential suite, Ethan and Natalie finished dressing for the evening. Ethan adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, trying to settle the nerves that buzzed beneath his calm exterior. Lily tugged at the hem of her pink dress, looking up at her father with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, are you going to talk about what happened?" she asked, her voice innocent but full of a child's earnest curiosity. Ethan crouched down to her level, smoothing a stray curl behind her ear. "I might, sweetheart, but most of all, I'm going to talk about how important it is to be kind and to help people who need it." Lily nodded solemnly, as if absorbing a great truth. "Like you do at the center?" Ethan's smile softened, and he kissed the top of her head. "Exactly like that. Now, are you ready to go downstairs and meet a lot of people?" Lily's eyes brightened with excitement, and she took his hand eagerly. "Yes." As they gathered in the living room, Carter joined them, adjusting the cuff of his blazer with a thoughtful look on his face. "Do you think she's sorry?" he asked suddenly, glancing at his father. "That woman from earlier?" Ethan paused, considering his answer. "I think she is, but being sorry isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to show it with what you do next." Carter nodded, his brow furrowing as he processed his father's words. Then he shrugged, giving Ethan a small smile. "Well, at least tonight will be better, right?" Ethan returned the smile, hoping that his son's optimism would carry through the night. "Yeah, buddy. Tonight is about celebrating what we built together." As the James family stepped into the elevator, Ethan couldn't have known that Rachel was still nearby, steeling herself for the conversation that lay ahead. She watched from a distance as they entered the grand ballroom, a space lit with golden chandeliers and filled with the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. She felt a pang of longing, knowing that she had no place among the gala's esteemed guests. But as she watched Ethan step forward into the spotlight, holding his daughter's hand, she knew that this moment wasn't about her. It was about a family who deserved the recognition they were about to receive, a family she had almost denied that right. And as she turned away, heading home to prepare for her first day at the youth center, Rachel silently vowed to prove that she could be more than her mistakes. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Rachel found herself hoping for a chance at redemption. The grand ballroom of the Lincoln Plaza Hotel was a dazzling spectacle. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across polished floors, reflecting off the elegantly set tables and the intricate floral arrangements that adorned the room. The murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet filled the air, creating an atmosphere of refined excitement. Waiters moved smoothly between the tables, offering champagne to the guests who were dressed in their finest. Ethan James stood near the edge of the ballroom, scanning the crowd. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself amid the grandeur that surrounded him. Natalie was at his side, offering a reassuring smile, her hand resting gently on his arm. Carter and Lily were mingling nearby with some of the other families who had brought their children to the event. But even in this beautiful setting, the events of the afternoon lingered in Ethan's mind. "They really went all out," Natalie remarked, her eyes following the glittering lights above. She turned back to her husband, her expression softening. "You've done so much for this community, Ethan. Just focus on that tonight." Ethan nodded, but a tension still pulled at his chest. He couldn't quite shake the unease that had settled there since their confrontation with Rachel. It wasn't just about the slight against his family. It was the reminder that, even now in places like this, they still had to fight for the respect they deserved. Across the room, guests mingled and chatted, but there was a subtle, almost unspoken undercurrent running through the conversations. Some of those who had witnessed the earlier scene in the lobby now looked at the James family with a new kind of curiosity, wondering if they would address the incident or let it pass. Ethan could feel the weight of those expectations pressing on him, but he kept his expression steady, determined not to let anyone see how deeply the day's events had affected him. Meanwhile, Rachel lingered just outside the ballroom, her heart beating fast as she peered through a small gap in the door. She wasn't supposed to be here. Mr. Daniels had made it clear that she was off duty for the evening, but she had come anyway, unable to shake the need to see the gala she had nearly ruined for the James family. She spotted Ethan standing near the stage, the tall, confident figure that she now saw in a very different light. He looked composed, but Rachel could see the tension in the way he held himself, the weight of the day's events pressing down on his shoulders. She wondered if he knew she was watching, and a small part of her hoped he wouldn't notice. Her thoughts drifted back to the words Mr. Daniels had spoken earlier. "You'll need to earn back the trust you've lost." She knew that volunteering at the youth center was supposed to be her chance to make things right, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough. How could she make up for the hurt she had caused, the way she had made Ethan's family feel unwelcome? Lost in thought, Rachel almost didn't notice when Mr. Daniels himself appeared beside her, his expression unreadable. "Why are you here, Rachel?" he asked, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb the guests inside. Rachel started, turning quickly to face him. She hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I just wanted to see the event," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I wanted to understand what they're doing here, what I almost ruined." Mr. Daniels studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You might as well come in then," he said, surprising her, "but stay out of the way. Tonight is their night, not yours." She nodded gratefully, slipping into the back corner of the room where she could watch without drawing attention. From there, she saw Ethan take the stage, a hush falling over the crowd as he stepped up to the microphone. Ethan cleared his throat as he adjusted the microphone, the room falling silent as all eyes turned toward him. He felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, the expectation and the pressure to deliver a message that would resonate with everyone in the room. He glanced over to Natalie, who gave him an encouraging nod, then down to where Carter and Lily sat at a table near the front, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. He took a deep breath, letting the words he had prepared run through his mind one last time before he spoke. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice carrying through the room. "Tonight, we're gathered to celebrate the progress we've made in this community. Progress that wouldn't have been possible without the generosity and support of so many of you here tonight. But more importantly, we're here to recognize the young people who are the true heart of that progress." There was a polite murmur of agreement from the crowd, but Ethan could still feel the tension hanging in the air, unspoken but palpable. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to address it head-on. "I have to admit, though, that today hasn't been the easiest day for my family," he said, his tone growing more serious. He saw a few surprised faces in the audience, the sudden shift in tone catching them off guard. "But it's also been a reminder of why we do this work and of why these youth programs are so important." He looked out over the crowd, letting his gaze linger on the faces of those who had watched them with skepticism when they arrived. It's easy to make assumptions about people when you don't know their story. It's easy to judge based on appearances or first impressions. But what we're doing here, what I hope we're doing, is building a community that sees past those assumptions, a community that values each person for who they are and what they bring to the table. Rachel felt her chest tighten as she listened, a knot of guilt twisting deeper inside her. She knew that Ethan's words were meant for everyone, but she couldn't help feeling as though they were aimed directly at her. She shifted uncomfortably, wishing she could disappear into the shadows. Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "I believe in the potential of every young person in our community, and I believe that when we invest in them, we build a brighter future for all of us. That's why I'm grateful to be here tonight, despite the challenges we've faced, because I know that what we're working toward is worth fighting for." As he finished, a wave of applause swept through the room, mingled with a few murmurs of appreciation. Ethan stepped back from the microphone, his heart still racing with the intensity of what he had just shared. He made his way back to his seat where Natalie squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she whispered, leaning close. "You said exactly what needed to be said." Ethan gave her a small smile, though his mind remained heavy with the weight of the day's events. He wondered if his words would truly make a difference, if they would linger in the minds of those who had judged his family so easily. Rachel slipped out of the ballroom as the applause echoed in her ears, her mind spinning with everything she had heard. She found herself standing in one of the quieter hallways of the hotel, staring at her reflection in a large mirror framed with gold. The woman who looked back at her seemed uncertain, her eyes haunted by the realization of how deeply she had misjudged the man who had just spoken so passionately about community and respect. She thought back to how she had treated the James family, how she had let her own biases shape her actions, even though she had believed herself to be fair and professional. The realization stung, but it also pushed her to confront a truth she had long avoided, that she had allowed herself to become a gatekeeper, deciding who was worthy of respect and who wasn't. "I need to change," she thought, her hands clenching into fists. But is it too late to make things right? As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, a familiar voice interrupted her. You know, you don't have to hide out here. She turned sharply to see Mr. Daniels, his hands in his pockets, his expression softer than it had been earlier. He leaned against the wall, regarding her with a thoughtful look. Did you hear his speech? He asked. Rachel nodded, her throat tightening. I did. Mr. Daniels sighed, glancing back toward the ballroom. He spoke about assumptions and giving people a chance, and I think he meant every word of it, which is why he's still willing to give you that chance, if you're ready to take it. Rachel swallowed hard, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She thought of the youth center, of the young people Ethan had spoken about with such passion. She thought of the opportunity to see beyond her own narrow view of the world. I'll do it, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'll go to the youth center. I'll try to make things right. Mr. Daniels gave a short nod, his expression softening with a hint of approval. Good, because real work starts tomorrow, and it won't be easy. Rachel nodded, a determined look settling into her eyes. I know, but I'm ready. Back in the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. Conversations seemed lighter, more open, as if Ethan's speech had lifted some of the weight that had hung over the room. Guests approached Ethan and Natalie, offering compliments on the speech, expressing interest in learning more about their work at the youth center. Some of those who had cast judgmental looks earlier now seemed eager to make amends. Carter, who had watched his father's speech with pride, grinned as he overheard one of the guests praising Ethan's dedication. Dad, you really got through to them, didn't you? Ethan smiled, ruffling his son's hair. Maybe a little, buddy. Maybe a little. As the evening wore on, the James family found themselves surrounded by warmth and camaraderie, the earlier tension beginning to melt away. But even as they enjoyed the newfound acceptance, Ethan couldn't help but notice Rachel's absence, wondering what had become of the woman who had once dismissed them so easily. Little did he know that Rachel's journey had only just begun, and that her path toward redemption would soon intersect with theirs in unexpected ways. The next morning, Rachel stood outside the Eastwood Youth Center, her hands tightly gripping the strap of her purse. The building was a far cry from the opulence of the Lincoln Plaza. The brick exterior was weathered, and the colorful mural that covered one side of the building, depicting children playing and reading under a bright sun, was slightly faded. Yet there was warmth about the place that Rachel could feel even before stepping inside. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door, her footsteps echoing down the narrow hallway. Laughter and chatter filtered through the air, coming from a room at the far end. She followed the sound until she reached a large common area filled with children of all ages, engaged in various activities. There were kids painting, reading, playing basketball in the small outdoor court visible through the windows, and even a few teenagers hunched over laptops, working with a volunteer. As Rachel hovered uncertainly near the entrance, a woman in her mid-40s with curly hair and a warm smile approached. You must be Rachel, she said, extending a hand. I'm Sarah, the program coordinator here. Ethan told me you'd be starting with us today. Rachel shook her hand, trying to match Sarah's welcoming demeanor. Yes, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to helping out. Sarah nodded, though her expression was tinged with curiosity. She gestured toward a group of younger children gathered around a craft table. Why don't you start by helping with the art projects? The kids are working on some pieces for an upcoming fundraiser. Rachel nodded again and made her way to the table, where a group of kids between the ages of 5 and 10 were busy with glue sticks, colored paper, and glitter. She offered a tentative smile as she introduced herself, feeling awkward and out of place. But the children were quick to accept her presence, asking for help with their projects and showing off their creations with pride. As the morning passed, Rachel began to find a rhythm, helping one child with their drawing, offering suggestions to another. She found herself relaxing, her nervousness slowly melting away in the face of the kids' energy and enthusiasm. Yet a nagging thought remained at the back of her mind. How do I prove that I'm really here to change? Later that afternoon, Rachel was cleaning up some of the art supplies when she heard a familiar voice behind her. She turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, a faint smile on his face. Rachel, he said, nodding toward her, I see you've met some of our regulars. She managed a small smile in return, though she could feel her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Yeah, they're a lot of fun. They've been teaching me a few things about crafting. Ethan chuckled softly, stepping further into the room. They're good at that, and they can be pretty forgiving if you show them you're willing to put in the effort. Rachel's smile faltered, and she glanced down at the pile of glittery paper in front of her. I know I've got a lot to make up for, she admitted quietly. I'm not expecting forgiveness right away, especially from you, but I want you to know that I'm here because I want to understand what I got wrong. Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate you saying that, but words only go so far, Rachel. If you're really serious about making things right, then show us through your actions. Rachel nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I will, I promise. As the days turned into weeks, Rachel found herself becoming more and more involved at the youth center. She helped organize tutoring sessions, assisted with basketball games, and even worked alongside Sarah to plan a community event for the kids. Yet the process wasn't without its challenges. Rachel quickly learned that many of the kids she worked with came from difficult backgrounds, families struggling to make ends meet, or homes where they faced challenges that Rachel could barely imagine. She often found herself overwhelmed, unsure of how to connect with their experiences or how to offer support without seeming out of place. There were moments when the kids eyed her with skepticism, sensing her initial discomfort, and moments when she caught herself falling back into old habits of judgment before she forced herself to stop and listen. One afternoon, as she helped a teenage boy named Marcus with his math homework, he glanced at her with a knowing smirk. You're not like the usual volunteers we get around here, he said, his tone half teasing, half curious. Rachel felt her face flush. What do you mean? Marcus shrugged, leaning back in his chair. You look like one of those fancy hotel people. My mom used to work in a place like that before they let her go. They never really treated her right. The words stung, but Rachel forced herself to hold his gaze, to keep her voice steady. I guess I was one of those people. But I'm trying to be better now. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then gave a small, grudging nod. Yeah, well, we'll see. The youth center's community event arrived on a warm Saturday afternoon, drawing a crowd of families, local business owners, and volunteers. Tables were set up with food and activities, and a stage had been arranged for speakers to talk about the center's impact on the community. Rachel had spent the morning helping to set up, carrying folding chairs and organizing crafts for the kids. But as the event began, she felt a knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. She knew that she would be expected to speak. Ethan had mentioned it casually earlier in the week, suggesting that she share her experience of working with the center. But as she watched the crowd gather, her nerves threatened to get the better of her. What if they don't believe me? What if they see right through me? As the event continued, Ethan took the stage to deliver a speech about the youth center's achievements and its goals for the future. He spoke with the same passion and conviction that Rachel had witnessed at the gala, his words carrying a deep sense of commitment to the kids he worked with. As he wrapped up, he gestured toward Rachel, inviting her to join him on stage. She hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment settle heavily on her shoulders. But then she remembered the promise she had made, to Ethan, to Mr. Daniels, and to herself. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Facing the crowd, she found herself looking out at a sea of expectant faces. Kids she had come to know over the past weeks, their parents, and a few familiar faces from the Lincoln Plaza. She cleared her throat, her voice wavering as she began. Hi, my name is Rachel Turner, she said, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the podium. And, some of you might know me, and not for the best reasons. A few murmurs rippled through the audience, but she pressed on, her voice growing stronger. I work at the Lincoln Plaza Hotel. A few weeks ago, I made some mistakes. I judged people I shouldn't have judged. I made assumptions about people without knowing who they really were. And I hurt people because of it. She paused, her gaze flicking toward Ethan and Natalie, who stood near the front of the crowd. Natalie offered her a small, encouraging smile, and Rachel drew strength from it as she continued. I've spent the past few weeks here, at this center, trying to understand what I got wrong, she said, her voice growing steadier. And I've realized that there's so much more to people than I ever took the time to see. These kids, this community, they've shown me what it means to care, to look past the surface, and to actually listen. She took a deep breath, feeling the burn of tears behind her eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I have to earn that, and I know that it's going to take time. But I want you to know that I'm committed to this and that I'm sorry for the hurt I caused. For a moment, there was silence, the crowd processing her words. Then, to Rachel's surprise, a few people began to clap, softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Marcus, the teenage boy she had helped with his math, gave her a nod from where he stood with his friends, a small but genuine gesture of acceptance. Rachel stepped back from the podium, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders even as her legs trembled. Ethan stepped forward, offering her a handshake that she gratefully accepted. His expression held a quiet respect, though his eyes remained serious. That took courage, Rachel, he said quietly, just for her to hear. But remember, this is only the beginning. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan caught up with Rachel near the refreshments table, where she was helping to clean up. He handed her a bottle of water, giving her a thoughtful look. You know, I didn't expect you to open up like that, he admitted. It's not easy to own up to mistakes, especially in front of a whole community. Rachel took a sip of water, feeling a small smile tug at the corners of her mouth. Yeah, well, it's about time I did something right. Ethan chuckled, then his expression grew more serious. I was thinking, we could use someone like you around here, someone who's learning to see things from a different perspective. If you're interested, I'd like to extend your time here, beyond just a volunteer stint. We could use the extra help, especially with the new projects we're starting. Rachel blinked, the offer catching her off guard. You'd want me to stay, even after everything? Ethan nodded. People change, Rachel. If you're serious about this, then you've got a place here. Rachel felt a swell of gratitude, but it was mixed with uncertainty. I'll think about it, she said, her voice faltering slightly. But thank you, Ethan. Really? Ethan smiled, giving her a nod. Take your time. We'll be here. As he walked away, Rachel found herself staring after him, her mind reeling with the possibilities of what lay ahead. She knew that the road to redemption was still long, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that she might be able to make a real difference, not just for herself, but for the people she had come to care about. And as the sun set over the Eastwood Youth Center, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Rachel stood with a newfound sense of purpose, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. Rachel's first few weeks of extended work at the Eastwood Youth Center were a whirlwind. She dove into tasks that ranged from tutoring to organizing weekend activities, working side by side with Sarah, Ethan, and the other volunteers. She helped coordinate a reading program, planned outings to museums, and even stepped in as an unofficial coach for the kids' basketball games. The days were long, filled with new experiences, and each evening she went home exhausted, yet satisfied in a way she hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Rachel still felt the weight of skepticism from some of the kids and parents who hadn't yet warmed to her. She couldn't blame them. She knew trust wasn't something that could be won overnight. But there were moments when the doubts crept in, whispering that perhaps she didn't truly belong here, that her efforts might never be enough to change the opinions of those who had witnessed her mistakes. One rainy afternoon, as Rachel helped a group of kids with their science fair projects in the center's library, she overheard a pair of parents talking in hushed tones by the door. "Isn't that the woman from the hotel?" one of them asked, casting a glance at her way. "Yeah, I heard she's doing this because she's in trouble," the other replied, her voice skeptical. "Not sure how much she actually cares." The words stung, hitting Rachel like a punch to the gut. She forced herself to keep her focus on the kids in front of her, but the doubt lingered, gnawing at her resolve. Am I really making a difference? Or am I just fooling myself, she wondered. Yet even as the doubts took hold, she resolved to keep pushing forward one small step at a time. One of the unexpected challenges and eventual rewards of Rachel's time at the youth center came in the form of Carter James. Ethan and Natalie's son had been a frequent visitor to the center, ever since Ethan had become deeply involved with its programs. Carter was a bright, observant 14-year-old with a knack for computer programming and a love of basketball. But he had kept his distance from Rachel at first, watching her with a wariness that she couldn't quite break through. Their interactions were polite but brief. Rachel would offer help with a project, and Carter would nod, muttering a quick thanks before moving on. It frustrated Rachel, though she understood where his hesitation came from. He had been there in the hotel lobby after all. He had seen the way she had treated his family. But one afternoon, that distance began to change. It started with a small thing. Rachel noticing Carter's frustration as he struggled to debug a piece of code on a laptop in the center's computer room. "You know, I've dabbled in coding before," she said hesitantly, hovering near his desk. "Maybe I could take a look." Carter looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes before he quickly masked it with his usual reserved expression. "You? Coding?" he asked, a skeptical smile tugging at his lips. Rachel shrugged, offering him a lopsided grin. "Hey, just because I used to work at a hotel doesn't mean I never learned how to write a bit of Python. Mind if I give it a try?" After a moment's hesitation, Carter relented, pushing the laptop toward her. Rachel leaned in, her brow furrowed as she scanned the lines of code. "Ah, here's your problem," she said after a few minutes, pointing to a misplaced parenthesis. "You closed the loop here, but it should be at the end." Carter fixed the error, and to his surprise, the program ran smoothly. He glanced at Rachel, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "You actually know what you're talking about." Rachel laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Yeah, I surprise myself sometimes too. But really, you're doing great. I didn't know you were into coding." Carter hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, my dad got me into it. He used to build stuff with me when I was a kid. But I like figuring things out on my own too." Rachel smiled, her heart warming at the unexpected connection. "That's cool. It's a good skill to have. And hey, if you ever need a second pair of eyes, I'm around." From that day on, Carter began to open up to Rachel bit by bit. He'd ask for her help with a tricky coding challenge or invite her to join a game of basketball with the other kids. It was a small shift, but to Rachel, it felt monumental, a sign that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to build a bridge where there had once been a wall. As Rachel continued to spend time at the youth center, she found herself learning from the kids in ways she hadn't expected. She saw the resilience of children like Marcus, who struggled with school but lit up when talking about his dreams of becoming an architect. She watched as Kayla, a shy 10-year-old, slowly gained confidence through the reading program Rachel helped to organize. And she began to understand the struggles that families in Eastwood faced, challenges she had never had to consider before. One evening, as Rachel was locking up the center after a long day, she noticed Ethan standing outside, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She hesitated for a moment, then joined him, leaning against the railing beside him. "It's peaceful out here," she remarked, glancing up at the purple-orange sky. Ethan nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Yeah, it is, but it doesn't always feel like that. This community has been through a lot." Rachel nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the cracked pavement beneath their feet. "I'm starting to see that. I used to think that if people just worked hard enough, they could get wherever they wanted. But now, I don't know. I think I had it all wrong." Ethan turned to look at her, studying her with a quiet intensity. "You did," he said bluntly, though not unkindly. "But it's good that you're starting to see it differently. The kids here, they're full of potential, but sometimes they just need someone who believes in them." Rachel swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. Do you think I can really make a difference here? After everything I did?" Ethan's expression softened, and he gave a small encouraging smile. "That's not up to me, Rachel. It's up to you. But if you keep showing up, if you keep listening, you might be surprised by what you can do." Despite the progress Rachel was making, she found herself confronted with her past in ways she hadn't anticipated. One Saturday afternoon, she was helping Sarah set up for a community workshop when a group of hotel regulars, wealthy patrons who lived nearby, showed up for a tour of the center. Among them was Mrs. Whitaker, an older woman who had often frequented Lincoln Plaza and who had been among those who had witnessed the scene in the lobby weeks ago. Rachel's heart skipped a beat when she recognized Mrs. Whitaker, who looked equally surprised to see Rachel in this setting. Well, if it isn't the face of the Lincoln Plaza, Mrs. Whitaker remarked, her voice carrying a faint edge. I didn't expect to see you here, Miss Turner. Rachel stiffened, trying to maintain her composure. I'm volunteering at the center now, trying to make a difference. Mrs. Whitaker raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. How noble of you. I hope this isn't just a temporary distraction before you go back to… What was it? Protecting the hotel's reputation? The words cut deep, but Rachel forced herself to remain calm, even as she felt the eyes of the other patrons on her. I made mistakes, she said, her voice steady but firm. But I'm trying to make things right, and I'm learning that there's a lot more to people than I ever understood before. Mrs. Whitaker scoffed lightly, her gaze drifting dismissively over the center. Well, I suppose everyone needs a charity project. Let's hope this one sticks. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a voice cut through the tension. Marcus, who had been listening from a few feet away. Ms. Rachel's not a project, he said, his tone defiant as he stepped forward. She's helping us because she cares. Mrs. Whitaker looked taken aback by the teenager's boldness, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words. Rachel felt a surge of emotion at Marcus's words, and she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Marcus, she said softly, before turning back to Mrs. Whitaker. He's right. I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to be. Mrs. Whitaker's gaze softened slightly, though her skepticism remained. We'll see, Ms. Turner. We'll see. With that, she turned and continued her tour, leaving Rachel and Marcus standing together in the wake of the encounter. Later that day, Rachel found herself sitting on the steps of the youth center, feeling a strange mix of frustration and relief. The encounter with Mrs. Whitaker had shaken her, but it had also reminded her of how far she had come and how far she still had to go. Marcus joined her on the steps, a grin spreading across his face. You should have seen her face, Miss Rachel. I thought she was going to explode when I spoke up. Rachel laughed, though tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. You didn't have to do that, you know. But, thank you. Marcus shrugged, his expression turning serious. You're not so bad, Miss Rachel. I guess we're all just trying to figure things out, right? Rachel nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for the unexpected friendship she had found in this place. Yeah, Marcus. I think you're right. As the sun set over the Eastwood Youth Center that evening, Rachel felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't known she was missing. For the first time in a long while, she believed that she might actually be able to make a difference, and that, perhaps, she was finally starting to make things right. It had been nearly 3 months since Rachel had begun volunteering at the Eastwood Youth Center, and though she still carried the weight of her past mistakes, she felt more at home in this place than she had in a long time. The kids had begun to accept her presence, and she had found unexpected joy in working alongside them, watching as they grew more confident in themselves. But as the days turned cooler and the leaves began to change, an event loomed on the calendar that would test Rachel in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Lincoln Plaza's annual Fall Gala, a high-profile event that raised funds for community initiatives, including those run by the Youth Center. Ethan and Natalie had been invited as special guests, and Rachel, to her surprise, had been asked to join as part of the Youth Center team. The invitation had come from Mr. Daniels, who believed that Rachel's work at the center deserved recognition. But as the evening approached, Rachel couldn't shake the anxiety that clung to her. She would be returning to the place where her mistakes had been laid bare, facing the same crowd that had witnessed her worst moments. And she knew that not everyone would be willing to forget what had happened. The ballroom of the Lincoln Plaza shimmered under the glow of chandeliers, filled with the murmur of conversation and the soft clink of glasses. Rachel stepped inside, her heart racing as she took in the familiar surroundings. Unlike the last time she had walked these halls, she wasn't wearing the uniform of a receptionist, but a simple dress she had borrowed from a friend at the center. Yet she couldn't escape the sense of being out of place. She caught sight of Ethan and Natalie across the room, mingling with donors and community leaders. Natalie offered her a small, encouraging wave, but Rachel hesitated, unsure if she should approach. Before she could decide, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Well, if it isn't the former gatekeeper of the Lincoln Plaza, a man drawled. Rachel turned to see Mr. Carlyle, a frequent guest of the hotel, standing with a group of wealthy patrons who had seen the scene unfold months ago. His smile was sharp and mocking, and Rachel felt her stomach clench as she met his gaze. She forced herself to stand tall, keeping her voice steady. "I'm here with the youth center," she said, trying to maintain a polite tone. "We're raising funds for new programs, including the tutoring sessions we run for the kids." Mr. Carlyle's smile widened, but it was far from friendly. "That's cute. But tell me, Miss Turner, do you really think you can change who you are just by slumming it with those kids for a few months? Seems to me like you're just trying to scrub off the stain of your mistakes." Rachel's face flushed with heat, but she held his gaze, refusing to look away. "I know I've made mistakes," she replied, her voice firm even as it trembled with emotion. "But I'm not doing this to make myself look better. I'm doing it because I've learned that there's more to people than I used to see. More than I ever took the time to see." Mr. Carlyle laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound, and Rachel felt the sting of humiliation rise in her chest. But before she could respond, another voice joined the conversation. Marcus, who had been standing nearby, his dark eyes flashing with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, his voice carrying through the room. He stepped forward, facing Mr. Carlyle with a defiance that made Rachel's heart swell with pride. "Ms. Rachel's helped a lot of us at the center. She cares about us. She's there every day, and she's not afraid to listen and learn. So maybe you should take the time to do the same." Mr. Carlyle's face darkened, and he opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Ethan appeared at Rachel's side, his expression calm but carrying an undeniable edge. "Marcus is right," he said, his tone measured. "Rachel's been doing the hard work, showing up, learning, and proving that people can change. Isn't that what we're supposed to be supporting tonight? Giving people a chance to grow?" For a moment, the air in the ballroom seemed to freeze, the tension hanging heavy between them. Then slowly the murmurs began to fade, and a few guests nodded in agreement, shifting uncomfortably under Ethan's steady gaze. Mr. Carlyle snorted, but the mockery had faded from his eyes. "Well, I suppose it's a free country," he muttered, turning away to rejoin his group. As he walked off, Rachel felt the knot of tension in her chest loosen, replaced by a wave of gratitude that left her momentarily speechless. After the confrontation, Ethan turned to Rachel, his expression softening as he met her eyes. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Rachel nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I think so. I didn't expect you to stand up for me like that." Ethan offered a small, understanding smile. "You've earned it, Rachel. You've shown that you're willing to put in the work, even when it's not easy. And it's not just about what happened in the past. It's about the person you're choosing to be now." Rachel's breath hitched, and she glanced toward Marcus, who stood a few feet away, his arms crossed as he watched the crowd warily. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for giving me a chance when you didn't have to." Ethan's smile widened slightly, though his eyes remained serious. "It's not about me, Rachel. It's about what you do next. But if you're willing to keep fighting for these kids, for this community, you'll have more support than you think." Rachel nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination take root inside her. She glanced toward Marcus, then back at Ethan. "I am willing, and I'm not giving up, not on this place or on myself." Later that evening, as the gala continued, Rachel found herself outside on the balcony, seeking a moment of quiet after the confrontation. The cool night air brushed against her face, carrying the distant sounds of the city beyond the hotel's walls. She was lost in thought when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Carter standing there, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Carter broke the silence, his voice hesitant. "I heard what happened in there. With that guy, Mr. Carlyle." Rachel swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, it was, intense." Carter nodded, looking down at his shoes. "You know, I was really mad at you when all this started. I didn't think you could change, and maybe I didn't want to believe you could." Rachel's heart clenched at his words, but she forced herself to keep listening. "I don't blame you, Carter," she said quietly. "I gave you a lot of reasons to doubt me." Carter glanced up at her, and for the first time, she saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. Yeah, but you proved me wrong. You showed up, and you helped my friends. And I guess I realized that maybe I was wrong about you too. Rachel felt a lump form in her throat, and she blinked back the tears that blurred her vision. Thank you, Carter. That means more than you know. Carter shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm glad you're here, Ms. Rachel, and I'm glad you didn't give up. Rachel managed a watery smile in return. Me too, Carter, me too. They stood together in the quiet of the balcony, the city lights stretching out before them like a promise of new beginnings. And for the first time since her journey had begun, Rachel felt a sense of peace settling inside her, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she had found her place after all. As the gala wound down, Rachel rejoined the crowd inside, feeling a sense of acceptance that she had once thought was out of reach. She chatted with guests who were now more curious about the work at the youth center than her past mistakes. She felt the warmth of the community beginning to embrace her, not as a penance, but as a sign of the changes she had made. By the time the evening ended, she had received offers of donations for the youth center and promises from local business owners to volunteer their time. But most importantly, she had found a sense of belonging that went deeper than any title or job. As she said her goodbyes to Ethan and Natalie, Rachel felt a surge of gratitude for the people who had given her a second chance. I'll see you all at the center next week, she said, offering them a sincere smile. And thank you again for everything. Natalie returned the smile, her eyes warm. We're proud of you, Rachel. Keep going. Ethan nodded, giving her a reassuring clap on the shoulder. We'll see you there. With their encouragement echoing in her heart, Rachel left the Lincoln Plaza that night, stepping out into the cool embrace of the city. The journey ahead would still be difficult, and there would be more challenges to face. But as she walked down the busy street, she carried with her the knowledge that she had begun to make a difference, not just for herself, but for the people she had come to care about. And she knew that, whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. In the weeks following the gala, Rachel felt a shift in how she was perceived at the youth center and in the broader community. Where there had once been skepticism, she now found tentative trust and openness. Parents who had kept their distance began to approach her, asking about the new programs she was helping to organize. Kids who had once eyed her warily now came to her for advice on everything from school projects to navigating friendships. Ethan and Sarah invited Rachel to become a part of the planning committee for the youth center's upcoming initiatives. They were hoping to expand the tutoring program into a full after-school curriculum, and Rachel's experience in hospitality proved unexpectedly valuable in coordinating the logistics. One Saturday morning, Rachel sat with Ethan and Sarah in the center's small office, surrounded by stacks of proposals and applications for new volunteers. She was outlining a plan to host a technology workshop for the older kids, when Sarah glanced at her with a warm smile. You know, Rachel, you've really made a difference here, Sarah said, her tone sincere. We wouldn't have been able to get this program off the ground without your help. Rachel felt a swell of pride, though she kept her expression modest. I'm just glad to be a part of it, she replied, glancing at Ethan. And thank you both for giving me the chance. Ethan nodded, his smile tinged with quiet pride. You earned it, Rachel, and I think you found your place here, with all of us. The words resonated deeply, and for the first time, Rachel felt a sense of true belonging, a sense that she was no longer just making up for past mistakes, but actively building something better alongside people who believed in her. One afternoon, as Rachel was preparing for a weekend event at the center, she was surprised to see Mr. Daniels arrive unannounced, looking slightly out of place in his tailored suit amid the buzzing activity of the kids playing basketball outside. Mr. Daniels? Rachel asked, setting down the box of art supplies she had been carrying. What brings you here? Mr. Daniels smiled, though his usual stern demeanor was still present. I wanted to see how you've been getting along, Rachel. I've heard good things about your work here, from Ethan and from the parents in the community. Rachel blinked, taken aback by the unexpected praise. Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you. Mr. Daniels nodded, glancing around the center with an appraising eye. It seems you found a way to make amends. But more than that, I think you found something that matters to you. I know things didn't start out the way any of us expected, but I'm proud of the progress you've made." Rachel felt a lump form in her throat, and she struggled to find the right words. I, I owe a lot of that to you, Mr. Daniels. You could have let me go, but instead you pushed me to do better. And I'm grateful for that." Mr. Daniels gave her a small, approving smile. "You've earned your place here, Rachel, and I think it's time the community knows it too." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a sealed envelope. Rachel took it, curiosity sparking, as she opened it to find a formal invitation to a ceremony at Lincoln Plaza, an event honoring those who had made significant contributions to the youth center and the community. "Consider it a chance to share your story with others," Mr. Daniels said, his voice gentle, "and to remind everyone that second chances are worth offering." The ceremony at Lincoln Plaza was smaller than the grand gala, but the ballroom still held a sense of warmth and celebration as local leaders, volunteers, and families from the youth center gathered to recognize the progress they had made together. Rachel stood at the edge of the room, feeling a familiar mixture of anxiety and hope as she watched the event unfold. This time, however, the setting no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a place where she could finally share the story of her journey and the lessons she had learned. When it was her turn to speak, Rachel stepped up to the podium, taking a deep breath as she looked out over the faces in the crowd. She saw Ethan and Natalie seated near the front, their expressions encouraging. Carter gave her a thumbs up, and Marcus grinned from his seat beside the other teenagers. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying a hint of the nerves she still felt. "I never thought I'd find myself back here, speaking in this ballroom after everything that happened. But I've learned a lot about second chances, about forgiveness, and about the power of community." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room. "When I started volunteering at the Eastwood Youth Center, I thought I was just trying to fix my mistakes. But what I found there was something much deeper, something that changed me in ways I never expected. I saw kids who were eager to learn, parents who wanted the best for their children, and volunteers who give their time and their hearts to make a difference." Rachel's voice softened, and she glanced toward Ethan and Natalie, emotion welling in her chest. "I'm grateful for the people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And I'm honored to be a part of a community that understands the value of growth, of learning, and of never giving up on each other." As she finished, a warm wave of applause filled the room, echoing through the ballroom with a resonance that felt like redemption. Rachel stepped back, feeling the tension she had carried for so long finally lifted from her shoulders. She met Ethan's gaze, and he gave her a proud nod, as if to say, "You've made it." As the ceremony wound down and guests mingled over coffee and desserts, Rachel found herself standing with Ethan, Natalie, and Carter by one of the tall windows that overlooked the city. She felt lighter than she had in months, a sense of contentment settling into her bones. Natalie gave her a warm hug, her voice filled with emotion. "You did great up there, Rachel. I hope you know how proud we are of you." Rachel smiled, blinking back the tears that stung at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you, Natalie. I couldn't have done any of this without you all. You helped me see that I could be more than my past." Carter chimed in, a teasing grin on his face. "So, Miss Rachel, does this mean you're going to keep helping me with my coding projects?" Rachel laughed, feeling the last of her nerves melt away. "Only if you promise not to get too good and make me look bad," she joked. Carter shrugged playfully. "I make no promises." Ethan joined in the laughter, but his expression softened as he looked at Rachel. "You've done a lot for this community, Rachel. But don't forget, you've done a lot for yourself too. You've earned your place here, and no one can take that from you." Rachel felt a surge of gratitude, and she reached out to shake Ethan's hand, her grip firm with the strength of newfound confidence. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Ethan returned the handshake with a smile, then pulled her into a brief friendly hug. "We're glad to have you with us, Rachel. Welcome to the team." As Rachel left the Lincoln Plaza that night, walking out into the cool night air, she couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed since she had first met the James family. She thought back to the woman she had been, defensive, quick to judge, unwilling to see beyond the surface, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she had taken. She had found her place in a community that had taught her the value of compassion, resilience, and understanding. And while the road ahead would still have its challenges, Rachel knew that she was ready to face them, with the support of the people who had become her friends and the kids who had come to trust her. She glanced up at the city lights glowing softly against the dark sky and felt a sense of hope filling her chest. For the first time in a long while, she believed in the possibility of a future built on kindness and the power of seeing each other fully. And as she walked down the busy street, she carried with her the knowledge that she had finally become the person she had always wanted to be. Someone who could make a difference, not just for herself, but for those around her. The air was warm with the promise of summer as Rachel stood in front of the Eastwood Youth Center, watching as a group of kids rushed out into the yard to enjoy the afternoon sunshine. The building had undergone a transformation in the months since she first walked through its doors, both physically and in spirit. Fresh coats of paint adorned the walls, new computers filled the study room, and a colorful garden bloomed just outside, planted by the kids as part of a spring project. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of pride settling into her chest as she surveyed the busy scene. It was a special day, Family and Community Day, an event that she, Ethan, and Sarah had planned together to celebrate the progress the youth center had made and to welcome new families to their growing community. Rachel glanced at the program she held in her hand, filled with activities and performances the kids had been preparing for weeks. As she walked toward the outdoor stage where a group of young dancers were rehearsing, she caught sight of Ethan and Natalie arriving with Carter and Lily in tow. Lily ran up to Rachel, her face bright with excitement. "Ms. Rachel, did you see my drawing in the art room? I put glitter on it, just like you taught me." Rachel crouched down, smiling warmly at the little girl. "I did see it, Lily, and it's beautiful. You're becoming quite the artist." Lily beamed with pride, and Rachel's heart swelled at the thought of how much this community had come to mean to her. She had found a place here, not just as a volunteer or an outsider trying to make amends, but as a true member of the Eastwood family. As the afternoon wore on, the festivities at the youth center continued, with kids playing games, parents chatting over lemonade, and volunteers helping with the barbecue. Amid the joyful chaos, Rachel spotted Mr. Daniels making his way toward her, a thoughtful look on his face. "Mr. Daniels, I didn't expect to see you here," Rachel said, offering him a smile. Mr. Daniels adjusted his tie, glancing around at the bustling scene. "I wanted to see the place for myself," he replied, his tone approving. "Ethan's told me all about the progress you've made here. It's impressive, Rachel. You should be proud." Rachel smiled, a hint of self-consciousness in her expression. "I can't take all the credit. It's been a team effort. Everyone here has put their heart into this place." Mr. Daniels nodded, then handed her a folder he had been carrying under his arm. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I have a proposal for you, Rachel, one that I think you're ready for." Rachel's curiosity piqued as she opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. Plans for expanding the youth center's programs with funding from the Lincoln Plaza Foundation and a proposal for her to become the official program director. "Mr. Daniels, I don't know what to say," Rachel stammered, feeling a rush of emotions welling up inside her. I never imagined something like this." Mr. Daniels gave her a rare, genuine smile. "You've shown us all that people can change, Rachel, and you've proven that you have the dedication and heart to make a real difference. This community needs someone like you leading the way. So what do you think?" Rachel looked up, meeting Mr. Daniels' steady gaze, and felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She had spent so long wondering if she could ever truly make amends, if she could ever be more than the mistakes she had made. Now, for the first time, she felt like the future was hers to shape. "I think I'd be honored," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." Later that day, as the event wound down and the sun dipped low in the sky, Rachel noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of the gathering. Mrs. Whitaker, the woman who had challenged her so sharply at the gala months before. She seemed out of place among the cheerful crowd, her expression guarded as she watched the kids play. Rachel hesitated, then made her way over, her heart beating faster with each step. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, her voice tentative, "I didn't expect to see you here." Mrs. Whitaker turned to face her, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she studied Rachel, then glanced around at the families enjoying the event. "I was curious," and she said finally. "I heard about the work you've been doing here, and I wanted to see it for myself." Rachel nodded, unsure of what to say. She could feel the tension between them, but she knew that this conversation held the weight of something important, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey they had both witnessed. "It's good work," Mrs. Whitaker admitted after a moment, her tone grudging but sincere. "I suppose I was wrong about you, Rachel. You've proven that you're not just trying to make up for your mistakes. You're trying to build something real." Rachel felt a surge of relief at the unexpected words, and she met Mrs. Whitaker's gaze with a steady smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. That means a lot coming from you." Mrs. Whitaker nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Keep doing what you're doing, Ms. Turner. These kids are lucky to have you." As Mrs. Whitaker walked away, Rachel watched her go with a sense of closure, knowing that she had come full circle. She had earned the respect of those who had once doubted her, and more importantly, she had earned respect for herself. As the event drew to a close and the families began to pack up, Ethan, Natalie, Carter, and Lily joined Rachel by the garden that the kids had planted earlier that spring. They watched as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the flowers and the laughter of children still playing in the yard. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Natalie said softly, her arm wrapped around Ethan's waist. "This whole place, it's come such a long way." Rachel nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat as she looked at the garden, the kids, and the friends she had come to cherish. "It really is, and I'm just glad I get to be a part of it." Ethan gave her a warm smile, his voice filled with sincerity. "You're more than just a part of it, Rachel. You're one of the reasons it's thriving." Carter grinned, elbowing Rachel playfully. "So, Ms. Rachel, are you ready to be the boss around here?" Rachel laughed, ruffling his hair in return. "I think I'll leave the bossing to Sarah and Ethan. But yeah, I'm ready, for all of it." Lily tugged on Rachel's hand, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Ms. Rachel, will you still come to the center when you're the director? I like when you're here." Rachel knelt down, meeting Lily's earnest gaze. "I'll be here, Lily, and I'll keep helping you with your drawings too. We're going to make this place better than ever. Together." Lily's face lit up with joy, and she threw her arms around Rachel's neck in a tight hug. Rachel hugged her back, feeling the warmth of the embrace sinking deep into her heart. As the evening faded into night and the families headed home, Rachel lingered outside the center, watching the lights twinkle in the windows. She felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling that she had fought hard to achieve. She thought back to the woman she had been to when she first met the James family. The woman who had judged too quickly, who had believed that appearances and status mattered more than understanding. And she thought of the woman she had become, someone who had learned to see beyond the surface, to listen, to care. Rachel smiled to herself as she turned toward the door of the youth center, ready to lock up for the night. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, moments when old fears might resurface. But she also knew that she had found the strength to face those challenges, surrounded by a community that believed in her. And as she walked away from the center, into the cool night air, she felt the promise of new beginnings stretching out before her like the path she had always been meant to follow. The road to redemption had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a place she could finally call home. The air was warm with the promise of summer as Rachel stood in front of the Eastwood Youth Center, watching as a group of kids rushed out into the yard to enjoy the afternoon sunshine. The building had undergone a transformation in the months since she first walked through its doors, both physically and in spirit. Fresh coats of paint adorned the walls, new computers filled the study room, and a colorful garden bloomed just outside, planted by the kids as part of a spring project. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of pride settling into her chest as she surveyed the busy scene. It was a special day, Family and Community Day, an event that she, Ethan, and Sarah had planned together to celebrate the progress the youth center had made and to welcome new families to their growing community. As the sun set over the center, casting a warm glow across the courtyard, Rachel couldn't help but feel grateful for how far she'd come. She had found a place here, not just as a volunteer or an outsider trying to make amends, but as a true member of the Eastwood family. If you enjoyed Rachel's journey from redemption to community, and if her story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. We're all about second chances, learning from mistakes, and finding hope in unexpected places. Join our community by hitting the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that touches the heart. Remember, every person's story matters, and yours does too. Let's keep sharing these meaningful journeys together.